When my son-in-law Marcus told me I was just an old woman who knows nothing about business at the family Christmas dinner, I didn't argue. I didn't raise my voice. I simply excused myself from the table, gathered my coat, and left without another word. What Marcus didn't know was that the company he was so proud of running had been quietly funded by me for the past 8 years. What he was about to discover would change everything. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. My name is Ada Collins. I'm 73 years old, and until that December evening in Boston, I had been content to let my daughter's husband believe he was the mastermind behind Richardson Tech Solutions. The irony wasn't lost on me that a company bearing his family name had been sustained by my quiet investments, routed through 3 different shell companies, and managed by my late husband's former business partner, Leonard Chen. Marcus had no idea that the woman he dismissed as irrelevant had been the invisible hand keeping his dreams afloat. The evening started like every other holiday gathering at their Beacon Hill townhouse. I arrived precisely at 6, carrying homemade cranberry bread because Sarah always complained that store-bought desserts lacked soul. The house gleamed with expensive decorations, the kind you see in architectural magazines, all crisp whites and metallic accents that probably cost more than most people's monthly rent. Their Christmas tree towered in the front window, adorned with ornaments that matched the color scheme, rather than carrying memories of holidays past. Sarah greeted me at the door wearing a dress I recognized from her Instagram posts, the kind that required professional styling to look effortless. She hugged me quickly, the way people do when they're performing affection rather than feeling it, and immediately launched into updates about Marcus's latest business triumph. The company had just landed their biggest client yet, she bubbled, a pharmaceutical giant that would triple their revenue stream. Marcus was already talking about expanding to the West Coast, maybe opening satellite offices in Seattle and San Francisco. I listened and nodded, offering the appropriate congratulations while mentally calculating how much of that success stemmed from the capital injection I'd authorized just 3 months earlier. Leonard had called it a bridge loan to help them through a rough patch with their previous major client, but I knew better. Richardson Tech had been hemorrhaging money for over a year, surviving entirely on my financial life support, while Marcus projected confidence to investors and competitors alike. The dining room table was set for 8, crystal glasses catching the light from the chandelier that cost more than my car. Marcus held court at the head, regaling his assembled audience of Sarah's cousins and their spouses with stories of his business acumen. He wore success like an expensive suit, gesturing with his wine glass as he described market penetration strategies and competitive advantages. I sat in the chair closest to the kitchen, the spot usually reserved for whoever might need to slip away to check on dinner or refill water glasses. Sarah's cousin David, who worked in finance, asked intelligent questions about Richardson Tech's growth trajectory. Marcus answered with the kind of polished confidence that comes from rehearsing success stories until they feel like gospel truth. He talked about bootstrapping the company from nothing, about the sacrifices he'd made, the risks he'd taken, the sleepless nights spent building something from pure vision and determination. I cut my turkey and chewed slowly, remembering the phone call I'd received 4 years ago when Richardson Tech was 3 weeks away from bankruptcy. Sarah had been 8 months pregnant with their first child, and Marcus was too proud to ask his in-laws for help directly. Instead, he'd confided in Sarah, who'd called me in tears, begging me to help them avoid losing everything they'd worked for. I'd written the check that same day, structuring it through Leonard's firm to look like investor capital rather than family charity. The conversation turned to holiday travel plans and school applications for the grandchildren, topics that required less performance from Marcus but still centered around their lifestyle of curated experiences and prestigious private institutions. I mentioned that I'd been volunteering at the Literacy Center downtown, teaching reading to immigrant families, but the comment slipped past without acknowledgement. My contributions to the conversation were treated like background noise, polite but ultimately irrelevant to the main show. After dinner, Marcus poured brandy for the men and suggested they retire to his study to discuss business more seriously. Sarah and her female cousins migrated toward the living room to look at photo albums from recent vacations to Martha's Vineyard and Aspen. I found myself in that familiar middle ground, too old to be included in the business talk, too uninteresting for the women's social hour. I was clearing dessert plates when David asked Marcus about his funding sources, clearly impressed by Richardson Tech's ability to scale so quickly in such a competitive market. Marcus swirled his brandy and launched into his practiced speech about angel investors and venture capital, painting himself as someone who'd managed to attract serious money through sheer force of innovation and charm. He mentioned a few legitimate smaller investors by name, then gestured vaguely toward, quote, other silent partners who prefer to remain behind the scenes. That's when I made my mistake. I looked up from stacking plates and said, quietly, sometimes the best partnerships are built on trust rather than recognition. It wasn't a challenge, just an observation, but something in my tone made Marcus focus on me for the first time all evening. His eyes narrowed slightly, and I could see him trying to figure out if I was being profound or presumptuous. David, unaware of the subtle tension, nodded enthusiastically. That's so true, Mrs. Collins. The tech industry especially relies on people who believe in long-term vision over short-term glory. He turned to Marcus. You're lucky to have investors who understand that kind of patience. Marcus set down his glass with more force than necessary. Well, David, I think you'd be surprised how many people want to give advice about business without understanding the first thing about what it actually takes to succeed. It's one thing to write a check, it's another to build something meaningful from the ground up. The room went quiet in that particular way that happens when someone says something that can't be taken back. Sarah looked mortified. Her cousins suddenly found their phones fascinating, and David tried to change the subject to something safer. But Marcus wasn't finished. The brandy had loosened his tongue, and months of family dinners where he'd had to perform gratitude for my presence had apparently been building toward this moment. I mean no disrespect, he continued, though his tone suggested otherwise. But there's a difference between people who actually understand business and people who think writing checks makes them experts. Ada, you're wonderful with the grandchildren, and Sarah loves having you involved. But let's be honest about what each of us brings to the table. You're just an old woman who knows nothing about the realities of running a company in today's market. The silence that followed felt like a held breath. I could hear the dishwasher humming in the kitchen, the grandfather clock ticking in the hallway, the distant sound of traffic on Commonwealth Avenue. Sarah's face had gone pale, and she was looking at Marcus with an expression I'd never seen before, something between horror and recognition. I stood slowly, my hands steady as I folded my napkin and placed it beside my empty dessert plate. I didn't look at Marcus as I spoke, just addressed the room in general with the kind of calm that comes from having nothing left to prove. Thank you for dinner, Sarah? It was lovely, as always. I think I'll head home now. Sarah stood too, reaching for my arm. Mom, please, Marcus didn't mean... Marcus meant exactly what he said, I replied, not unkindly, and that's perfectly fine. Everyone's entitled to their opinion. I collected my purse from the entry table and slipped on my coat while the dining room remained frozen in uncomfortable silence. I'll call you tomorrow, sweetheart. I drove home through the empty December streets, my hands gripping the steering wheel as the heat slowly warmed the car's interior. I wasn't angry, exactly. Anger felt too hot, too immediate for what had just happened. This was something colder and more permanent, like a door closing that had been propped open by habit rather than welcome. My apartment in Cambridge felt smaller than usual when I returned, though I'd always found comfort in its modest proportions. One bedroom, a galley kitchen that opened to a living room, filled with books and plants. Windows that looked out over a small park where I watched the seasons change from my reading chair. It was the kind of home Marcus would probably describe as quaint or downsizing, never understanding that I'd chosen it deliberately after Walter died, wanting space that belonged entirely to me. I made chamomile tea and sat at the kitchen table with my laptop, not because I had anywhere to be online, but because I needed the familiar ritual of checking email and reading news. The screen's blue light felt harsh after the warm glow of candles at dinner, and I found myself staring at my reflection in the dark window instead of focusing on the words in front of me. Walter and I had built our wealth quietly, through careful investments and a printing business that grew from a storefront operation to a regional company before we sold it to retire comfortably. We'd never been flashy about money, never saw the point of expensive cars or ostentatious houses. When Walter died 3 years ago, I inherited not just his love letters and woodworking tools, but also his investment portfolio and business relationships, including his partnership with Leonard Chen. Leonard had been calling me regularly since Walter's funeral, not out of obligation, but because he genuinely seemed to value my input on investment decisions. He'd grown up poor in Taiwan, immigrated to Boston in the 1970s, and built his financial consulting firm through the kind of hard work and shrewd judgment that impressed Walter enough to trust him with serious money. When I'd first asked Leonard to help Sarah and Marcus without revealing my involvement, he'd understood immediately why I wanted to remain anonymous. The next morning brought 3 missed calls from Sarah and 2 text messages that grew increasingly frantic. The first simply said, "Mom, please call me back." The second was longer. "I'm so sorry about last night. Marcus feels terrible. Can we please talk?" I made coffee and toast, read the newspaper front to back, and watered my plants before finally returning her call around 10. Sarah answered on the first ring, her voice tight, with the kind of stress I recognized from her teenage years, when she was trying to manage problems too big for her experience. "Mom, thank God I've been worried sick. Marcus is mortified about what he said. He was drunk, and he's been under so much pressure at work, and I know that's not an excuse, but he's really sorry." I settled into my reading chair and watched a cardinal pecking at the bird feeder outside my window. "Sarah, honey, you don't need to apologize for your husband's opinions. He's entitled to think whatever he wants about me." "But it's not what he thinks," she insisted. "He was showing off for David, trying to sound important, and he said something horrible that he didn't mean. You know how much he appreciates everything you do for our family." "What exactly do I do for your family, sweetheart?" The question hung in the air long enough that I could hear Sarah breathing, trying to find an answer that wouldn't sound patronizing or dismissive. You're so good with Emma and Jake. You help us with babysitting, and you bring food when I'm overwhelmed, and you're always there when we need you."
Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time. So if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now, back to the story.
Your family, Mom. That's what matters. I closed my eyes and felt something settle in my chest, a recognition that had been building for months without my conscious acknowledgement. "I'm going to ask you something, and I want you to answer honestly. When was the last time Marcus asked my opinion about anything that mattered to him? When did he last treat me like someone whose thoughts were worth hearing?" The silence stretched long enough that I knew she was really considering the question, rather than just preparing her defense. Finally, she said, "He's not good with older people, Mom. His own parents died when he was young, and he doesn't know how to relate to your generation. But that doesn't mean he doesn't respect you. Sarah, respect isn't something you have to learn how to show. It's something you either feel or you don't, and that's okay. Marcus and I don't need to have a relationship beyond what's necessary for you and the children. I'm not asking for his approval or his friendship. I just need you to understand that I'm not going to keep pretending that everything is fine when it's not." We talked for another 20 minutes, circling around the same territory while Sarah tried to convince me that Marcus's rudeness was an aberration rather than a pattern. I loved my daughter enough to let her believe that if it made her feel better, but I also loved her enough to stop participating in the charade that had been masking the dysfunction in their marriage. That afternoon, I called Leonard and asked if he could meet me for lunch the next day. We'd been corresponding by email and phone for months, but I suddenly wanted to sit across a table from someone who might understand why I needed to make some changes in how I managed my investments. Leonard chose a quiet restaurant near his office, the kind of place that served excellent food without any fuss or pretension. He arrived exactly on time, wearing a well-tailored suit that conveyed success without ostentation, and greeted me with the warm formality I'd grown to appreciate in our business relationship. We ordered and caught up on family news before I told him about Christmas dinner and Marcus's casual dismissal of my intelligence. Leonard listened without interrupting, his expression growing more thoughtful as I described the dynamic I'd been tolerating for years. When I finished, he set down his fork and considered his words carefully before speaking. "Ada, I need to tell you something that Walter made me promise to keep confidential, but I think he'd want you to know now. When you first asked me to help Richardson Tech anonymously, I advised against it. Not because I doubted their potential, but because I thought you deserved credit for your generosity. Walter told me you were protecting your daughter's marriage by allowing Marcus to maintain his pride, and that your happiness was worth more than recognition." I felt my throat tighten at the mention of Walter's protectiveness, his understanding of my motivations even when they sometimes baffled me. "And now?" Now I think Walter underestimated how much that dynamic would cost you over time. Marcus Richardson has been running his company on your money, while treating you like you're irrelevant to his success. That's not sustainable, and it's not fair to you. Leonard paused to sip his water, then continued. I have something I need to show you. Richardson Tech's financial records for the past year. As their primary investor, you have a right to see them. The folder Leonard handed me was thick with spreadsheets and quarterly reports, but the summary on top told the story clearly enough. Richardson Tech had been losing money steadily for 8 months, covering their operating expenses entirely through the credit line Leonard managed on my behalf. Marcus's big pharmaceutical client had actually reduced their contract by 60% after discovering quality control issues, and the company was now 3 weeks away from another cash flow crisis. More troubling were the salary and expense reports. Marcus had increased his own compensation by 40% over the past year, while laying off 2 junior developers. He'd charged a family vacation to Martha's Vineyard as a business retreat, expensed a new car as transportation necessary for client meetings, and approved consulting fees for his brother-in-law's marketing firm that had produced no measurable results. He's been treating your investment like his personal bank account, Leonard said quietly, and based on the projections I'm seeing, he'll need another substantial injection of capital within the month, or the company will fold entirely. I closed the folder and stared out the window at pedestrians hurrying past in the cold January air. What would happen if I pulled out now? If I called in the loans and closed the credit line? Leonard's expression was carefully neutral. Richardson Tech would be bankrupt within 2 weeks. Marcus would lose everything, including the house, since he used it as collateral for some of the earlier loans. Sarah and the children would be fine financially, of course, because of the trust fund Walter set up for her, but their lifestyle would change dramatically. We finished lunch in contemplative silence, and Leonard promised to prepare a comprehensive report on all my investment options, including the nuclear one of withdrawing support entirely. As I drove home, I found myself thinking not about Marcus's rudeness or even his financial irresponsibility, but about something Sarah had said during our phone call. She described me as someone who was always there when we needed you, and I realized how tired I was of being needed only for what I could provide, rather than valued for who I was. That evening, I did something I hadn't done in months. I called my sister Dorothy in Portland and told her the whole story, starting with Christmas dinner and ending with my discovery of Richardson Tech's true financial situation. Dorothy had never liked Marcus, though she'd been diplomatic enough to keep her opinions mostly to herself, and she listened with the kind of satisfying outrage that comes from being proven right about someone you'd suspected was a fraud. So what are you going to do? Dorothy asked when I finished recounting Leonard's revelations about the company's mismanagement. I'm not sure yet, I admitted. Part of me wants to pull out completely and let Marcus face the consequences of his poor decisions. But Sarah and the grandchildren would be collateral damage, and I'm not sure I can live with that. Ada, honey, you've been protecting Sarah from the reality of her marriage for years. Maybe it's time to let her see who she actually married. She's a smart woman, but she can't make good decisions if she doesn't have accurate information. After we hung up, I sat in my reading chair with a cup of tea and thought about Dorothy's words. For the past 8 years, I'd been enabling Marcus's delusions of grandeur while insulating Sarah from the financial instability of her husband's business ventures. I'd told myself I was being generous and supportive, but maybe I'd actually been preventing both of them from growing up and facing reality. The next morning brought an unexpected visitor. I was finishing my breakfast when the doorbell rang, and I opened it to find Marcus standing on my front step, looking more disheveled than I'd ever seen him. His usually perfect hair was uncombed, his expensive coat wrinkled, and his face had the gray cast of someone who hadn't been sleeping well. He was holding a large coffee and what looked like an expensive pastry box from the French bakery downtown. Ada, he said, attempting his usual charming smile but falling short of the full effect. I hope I'm not interrupting your morning. I brought you some of those almond croissants you mentioned liking. I stepped aside to let him in, curious about what had motivated this unprecedented gesture. Marcus had never visited my apartment before, had never shown any interest in my living space or my daily routines. He looked around with barely concealed surprise, as if he hadn't expected me to own books or comfortable furniture. This is lovely, he said, though I could tell he was struggling to find something complimentary to say about my modest home. Very cozy. Very you. I gestured toward the small dining table and offered him coffee, which he accepted gratefully. He seemed genuinely nervous, constantly adjusting his position in the chair and running his hands through his hair. I'd never seen him unsure of himself before, and the change was more unsettling than satisfying. Ada, I owe you an enormous apology, he began, launching into what sounded like a prepared speech. What I said at dinner was inexcusable. I was drunk and showing off, and I said something cruel that I absolutely didn't mean. You're not just important to our family, you're essential. Sarah would be lost without you. And the kids adore their grandmother. I was way out of line, and I'm truly sorry. I poured myself more coffee and waited to see if he had anything else to say. The apology felt rehearsed, like something Sarah had coached him through. But his nervousness seemed genuine enough. Finally, I asked, Marcus, what do you think I contribute to your family? He blinked, clearly not expecting the question to be turned back to him. Well, you're wonderful with Emma and Jake. They love spending time with you. And you help Sarah when she's overwhelmed. And you're always generous with your time and your support. What kind of support? The question seemed to catch him off guard, and he fumbled for an answer that wouldn't sound patronizing. Emotional support. Being there for us. Family support. I nodded slowly, understanding that he genuinely had no idea how much my financial support had shaped his life over the past 8 years. In Marcus's mind, I was exactly what he'd called me at dinner. An old woman whose primary value lay in providing free childcare and emotional comfort. The business loans, the capital injections, the credit lines that had kept Richardson Tech afloat were invisible to him, filtered through Leonard's firm and structured to preserve his sense of independence. Marcus, can I ask you something about your business? His posture straightened, and I saw the familiar flash of pride that came whenever anyone showed interest in Richardson Tech. Of course. What would you like to know? How do you find your investors? What makes someone decide to trust you with their money? He leaned forward, warming to a topic where he felt confident. It's all about relationships, really. Building trust, demonstrating results, showing people that you understand the market and have a vision for growth. The tech industry moves so fast that investors need to believe you can adapt and stay ahead of trends. I've been lucky to connect with some really smart people who recognize potential when they see it, and they don't expect much involvement in your day-to-day decisions. The best investors understand that micromanagement kills innovation. They write the check and let me do what I do best. Of course, I provide regular updates and quarterly reports, but they trust my judgment about operational details. Marcus paused to bite into his almond croissant, then continued. There's one group that's been particularly hands-off. They've been with us almost from the beginning, and they've never once questioned my strategic decisions. That's the kind of partnership that lets a company really flourish. I felt something cold settle in my stomach, as I realized that Marcus was describing my investment strategy as if it were evidence of his business acumen rather than my deliberate choice to remain invisible. He had no idea that his most patient, trusting investor was sitting across the table from him. No concept that the hands-off approach he attributed to their confidence in his leadership was actually my attempt to preserve his dignity. We chatted for another 20 minutes about Richardson Tech's expansion plans and Marcus's vision for the company's future. He seemed to relax as the conversation focused on his favorite subject, and by the time he left, he appeared convinced that his apology had been accepted and our relationship was back to normal. He kissed my cheek at the door and promised that Sarah and I would have lunch soon to catch up properly. After he left, I sat at the table staring at the expensive pastries he'd brought, understanding finally that Marcus hadn't come to apologize for disrespecting me. He'd come to ensure that I wouldn't disrupt the family dynamics that served him so well. In his mind, I was a resource to be managed, a potential source of conflict to be smoothed over with charm and empty gestures. That afternoon, I called Leonard and asked him to schedule a meeting for the following week. I want to see all the options, I told him. Every possible way to restructure my involvement with Richardson Tech, including complete withdrawal. Ada, are you sure? This is a decision that can't be easily undone. I'm sure, I replied, looking out my window at the park where spring bulbs were just beginning to push through the snow. It's time for everyone to see the full picture of what they've been taking for granted. The meeting with Leonard took place on a gray February morning in his downtown office, a space that managed to feel both professional and welcoming. Leonard had prepared 3 different scenarios for restructuring my investment in Richardson Tech, each with detailed financial projections and legal implications. The most conservative option involved maintaining my current level of support but requiring transparency about the funding source. The middle option called for reducing my investment by half and demanding a seat on the company's board of directors. The most dramatic option involved immediate withdrawal of all funds and calling in the outstanding loans. "Before you decide," Leonard said, sliding another folder across his desk, "there's something else you need to know. I hired a forensic accountant to review Richardson Tech's books more carefully, and we found some irregularities that go beyond poor judgment." The forensic report detailed what amounted to systematic embezzlement. Marcus had been funneling company funds through fake consulting contracts, inflated vendor payments, and fictional business expenses. The brother-in-law's marketing firm had received over $200,000 for services that were never rendered. The Martha's Vineyard business retreat had actually been a family vacation with no business activities whatsoever. Most damaging of all, Marcus had been transferring money to a personal investment account, using company funds to day trade cryptocurrency without any oversight or documentation. "This isn't just mismanagement," Leonard explained. "This is fraud. If Richardson Tech were a publicly traded company, Marcus would be facing criminal charges. As it stands, he's violated the terms of every loan agreement and could be held personally liable for the full amount of his company's debt." I studied the numbers, trying to reconcile the Marcus who'd sat in my kitchen apologizing with the Marcus who'd been stealing from his own company for over a year. How much has he taken in total? Just over $800,000. Not counting the lifestyle expenses he's charged to the company. Ada, he's been funding his family's standard of living entirely through your investment, while diverting additional money for his personal trading account. The betrayal felt different than his rudeness at Christmas dinner, deeper and more calculated. This wasn't thoughtless cruelty or casual dismissiveness. This was deliberate theft from someone he considered too irrelevant to pose a threat. Marcus had been so confident in my invisibility that he hadn't even bothered to hide his financial misconduct effectively. "What are my legal options?" Leonard opened another folder, this one containing draft documents prepared by his firm's legal team. "We can demand immediate repayment of all fraudulent transfers, plus interest and penalties. We can also require Marcus to surrender his ownership stake in the company as compensation for breach of fiduciary duty. If he can't meet those terms, we can force the sale of personal assets, including the house." I thought about Sarah opening her front door to find a foreclosure notice, about Emma and Jake asking why they had to leave their bedrooms and their prestigious private school. Then I thought about Marcus sitting in my kitchen, describing his investors' trust as evidence of his business acumen, while those same investors' money funded his cryptocurrency speculation. "There's a fourth option," I said slowly. "What if I took control of Richardson Tech entirely? Bought out Marcus's remaining stake and restructured the company under new management?" Leonard's eyebrows rose. "That's certainly possible, though it would require significant additional capital investment to stabilize the company's operations. You'd essentially be starting over with Richardson Tech's existing client base and intellectual property, but without Marcus's management style or financial irregularities." We spent the rest of the meeting working through the logistics of a complete takeover. Leonard's legal team could structure the acquisition to look like a standard business purchase rather than a hostile takeover, especially given Marcus's vulnerable legal position. The forensic evidence of his misconduct would make it nearly impossible for him to refuse any reasonable offer, particularly one that allowed him to walk away without facing criminal charges. By the time I left Leonard's office, I had a clear plan and a timeline for implementing it. Richardson Tech would continue to exist, but under my direct ownership, and with new management that actually understood technology and business ethics. Marcus would be out entirely, forced to find a new career that didn't involve access to other people's money. And Sarah would finally have to confront the reality of who she'd married and what their lifestyle had actually been built on. The next few days passed in careful preparation. Leonard's team worked on the legal documents while I researched potential candidates to run Richardson Tech once Marcus was removed. I also spent long hours thinking about how to handle the conversation with Sarah. knowing that she'd be devastated by the revelation of Marcus's fraud and the collapse of their carefully constructed life. Sarah called me Thursday evening, sounding cheerful and relaxed for the first time in weeks. Marcus had apparently convinced her that our kitchen conversation had resolved all the tension from Christmas dinner, and she was full of plans for a family weekend trip to see the cherry blossoms in Washington, D.C. She chattered about the children's school activities and Marcus's excitement about a potential new client, completely unaware that her husband's company was about to be sold out from under him. "Mom, I'm so glad things are better between you and Marcus," she said as our conversation was winding down. "He really does appreciate you, he's just not good at showing it. But he's been trying harder to include you in conversations about business and future plans." I almost laughed at the irony. Marcus's recent interest in including me in business discussions wasn't evidence of newfound respect. It was his unconscious recognition that something had shifted in our dynamic. He could sense that I was no longer content to remain invisible, but he had no idea that his attempts to manage my feelings were about to become irrelevant. Friday morning, Leonard called to confirm that all the paperwork was ready, and Marcus had agreed to meet with us the following Monday to discuss new investment opportunities with Richardson Tech. He had no idea that the meeting would actually involve him signing over control of his company or facing fraud charges. Leonard's tone was professionally neutral, but I could detect a note of satisfaction at the elegance of the trap we'd constructed. That weekend, I did something I hadn't done in months. I visited Richardson Tech's offices. The company occupied 2 floors of a converted warehouse in Cambridge, all exposed brick and industrial lighting designed to look innovative and creative. I told the receptionist I was thinking about investing in tech companies and asked for a tour of the facilities, curious to see what my money had actually built. The space was impressive in the way that modern offices are supposed to be impressive, with open work areas and expensive ergonomic furniture, and a kitchen stocked with organic snacks and craft coffee. But it was also mostly empty. The company that Marcus described as rapidly expanding actually employed fewer than 20 people, and several of the workstations appeared to be unoccupied. The conference room where Marcus held his important client meetings was decorated with motivational posters and a whiteboard covered in buzzwords that sounded important but meant nothing. The tour guide, a young woman who introduced herself as the office manager, was enthusiastic about Richardson Tech's mission and culture, but her answers to my questions revealed how little she actually knew about the company's financial situation or long-term strategy. When I asked about the company's growth plans, she repeated phrases that sounded like they'd been memorized from Marcus's presentations to investors. When I inquired about employee retention and satisfaction, she admitted that they'd had significant turnover in the past year, but attributed it to the, quote, fast-paced nature of the tech industry. As I was leaving, I noticed Marcus's office on the upper floor, visible through glass walls that were meant to symbolize transparency and accessibility. The space was larger than any of his employees' work areas, furnished with expensive pieces that looked more suited to a CEO's suite than a startup's headquarters. Marcus wasn't there, but his presence was evident in the framed photos of himself with local politicians and business leaders, the diplomas and awards covering one wall, the view of the Charles River that probably added $10,000 to the annual rent. I drove home understanding that Richardson Tech had been structured primarily to support Marcus's ego and lifestyle, rather than to build sustainable value for clients or employees. The company existed to make Marcus feel important, to provide him with a prestigious title and impressive office and opportunities to network with other successful people. My investment hadn't funded innovation or job creation. It had subsidized an elaborate performance of business success. Monday morning arrived gray and cold, typical for March in Boston. I dressed carefully for the meeting with Leonard and Marcus, choosing clothes that conveyed seriousness without ostentation. I wanted to look like someone who belonged in a boardroom, someone whose opinions about business might actually matter. I arrived at Leonard's office 15 minutes early and used the time to review the documents one final time, making sure I understood every clause and implication. Marcus arrived precisely on time, carrying a leather portfolio and wearing the kind of expensive suit that was meant to signal success and confidence. He greeted Leonard with the easy familiarity of someone accustomed to important meetings, then turned to me with a surprised but pleasant smile. Ada, how wonderful that you're interested in learning more about investment opportunities. Leonard mentioned you might want to diversify your portfolio into tech companies. He settled into his chair with the relaxed posture of someone who expected the meeting to go well. I'd be happy to walk you through Richardson Tech's growth strategy and explain why we're such an attractive opportunity for someone looking to get involved in the industry. Leonard and I exchanged a glance, and I felt a moment of something that might have been pity for Marcus's complete obliviousness to his situation. He genuinely believed that I'd asked for this meeting because I was impressed by his business acumen and wanted to become one of his investors. The possibility that I might already be his primary investor, or that I might have discovered his fraudulent activities, clearly hadn't occurred to him. Actually, Marcus, Leonard said, opening the first folder, Ada isn't here as a potential new investor. She's here as Richardson Tech's current primary investor, and she has some serious concerns about the company's financial management. The color drained from Marcus's face, and his confident posture collapsed like a deflated balloon. He looked back and forth between Leonard and me, clearly trying to process information that didn't fit his understanding of reality. I'm sorry, what? Ada's not. Our primary investor is Chen Financial Group. You handle our funding, Leonard, but Ada's not. Chen Financial Group manages investments on behalf of several clients. Leonard explained patiently. Ada Collins has been Richardson Tech's largest source of capital since the company's second year of operation. Every major loan, every line of credit, every emergency injection of funds has come from her portfolio. You've been running your business on her money for 8 years, Marcus. Marcus turned to stare at me, his expressions cycling through disbelief, confusion, and dawning horror. That's impossible. You don't know anything about business. You told me yourself that you don't understand technology or modern markets. I never told you that, I replied calmly. You told me that I don't understand business and I didn't correct you. There's a difference. Leonard slid a thick folder across the table to Marcus. These are Richardson Tech's complete financial records for the past 3 years, including documentation of every transaction funded by Ada's investment. I think you'll find everything in order, except for the items highlighted in red. I watched Marcus flip through the pages, seeing his face grow paler as he recognized the extent of my financial involvement in his company. Every major milestone he'd celebrated, every crisis he'd survived, every expansion he'd funded had been possible only because of my money. The investors he'd impressed with his business plan had been impressed by their confidence in my continued support, not by his entrepreneurial skills. When he reached the sections highlighted in red, his hands began to shake visibly. The forensic accountant's report laid out his fraudulent activities in meticulous detail, complete with bank records and transaction histories that would be impossible to explain away. The consulting payments to his brother-in-law's non-existent marketing firm, the personal cryptocurrency investments funded with company money, the family vacations disguised as business expenses, all of it was documented with the kind of precision that left no room for denial or explanation. Marcus set the folder down with trembling hands and looked at me with an expression I'd never seen before. Gone was the confident businessman who dismissed my intelligence, replaced by someone who looked genuinely frightened. Ada, I can explain all of this. There are legitimate business reasons for every transaction. Sometimes cash flow requires creative solutions, and the consulting fees were for services that... Marcus, stop. My voice was quiet but firm. Leonard's forensic accountant spent 3 weeks reviewing your books. We know exactly what you've been doing with my money, and we know it has nothing to do with legitimate business expenses. Leonard opened a second folder, this one containing legal documents prepared by his firm's attorneys. Marcus, you're facing potential criminal fraud charges for misappropriating investor funds. The total amount of money you've diverted for personal use exceeds the felony threshold in Massachusetts. However, Ada has asked me to present you with an alternative resolution. I leaned forward slightly, meeting Marcus's panicked gaze directly. You can sign over your ownership stake in Richardson Tech to me, immediately and without compensation. In exchange, I won't pursue criminal charges for the money you've stolen, and I'll allow you to walk away from this situation without going to prison. The silence that followed felt endless. Marcus stared at the documents Leonard had placed in front of him, his breathing shallow and rapid like someone having a panic attack. Finally, he looked up at me with an expression that was part desperation and part rage. "You can't do this to me. This is my company. I built Richardson Tech from nothing. You can't just take it away because you're angry about something I said at Christmas dinner." The casual dismissal of his fraud as something he said at dinner confirmed everything I'd suspected about Marcus's character. Even when confronted with evidence of his criminal behavior, he framed the situation as my emotional overreaction rather than the consequence of his own choices. He genuinely believed that his theft of $800,000 was less important than my hurt feelings about being called an ignorant old woman. "This has nothing to do with Christmas dinner," I said evenly. "This is about you stealing money from your investors and using it to fund your lifestyle and personal investments. This is about you violating every fiduciary duty you owed to the people who trusted you with their capital." Marcus's face flushed red, and for a moment I thought he might actually have the audacity to argue with me. Instead, he turned to Leonard with a pleading expression. "Leonard, you know me. You know I'm not a criminal. Those transactions might look bad on paper, but they were all intended to benefit the company long term. I was going to replace that money as soon as our cash flow improved." Leonard's expression remained professionally neutral, but I caught a flicker of distaste at Marcus's attempt to reframe theft as temporary borrowing. "Marcus, the forensic evidence shows a pattern of fraudulent activity spanning more than 18 months. This isn't a case of poor judgment or temporary cash flow problems. This is systematic embezzlement from your primary investor." I pulled out my phone and showed Marcus the screen, where I'd opened Richardson Tech's current bank balance. "Your company has $11,000 in operating accounts and payroll due on Friday for 23 employees. Without an immediate injection of capital, you'll be unable to meet your basic obligations by the end of this week. Even if I were inclined to overlook your theft, which I'm not, Richardson Tech is essentially bankrupt." Marcus stared at the numbers on my phone screen, and I could see the moment when he realized that his situation was even worse than he'd understood. Not only had he been caught stealing from his investors, but his company was also on the verge of complete collapse. Without my continued financial support, he had perhaps a week before Richardson Tech's employees would stop receiving paychecks, and clients would start demanding refunds for undelivered services. "How long have you known?" he asked quietly, his anger deflating into something that looked almost like grief. "How long have you been planning this?" "I've known about the financial problems for months," I replied. "The forensic audit happened after Christmas, after I decided I wanted to understand exactly how my money was being used. As for planning this meeting, I made that decision last Tuesday, after I toured your offices and saw how little my investment had actually accomplished." Marcus's head snapped up at that revelation. "You toured Richardson Tech? When?" "Saturday afternoon. I told your office manager I was a potential investor looking at tech companies. She was very enthusiastic about the company culture and growth opportunities, though she seemed to know remarkably little about the actual business operations." The look of betrayal on Marcus's face would have been satisfying if it weren't so pathetic. He was genuinely upset that I'd gathered information about my own investment without his knowledge or permission, as if I'd violated some unspoken agreement that he would control what I was allowed to know about the company my money was funding. Leonard cleared his throat and gestured toward the document still sitting unsigned in front of Marcus. "I need to point out that this offer has a limited window. If you don't accept these terms by close of business today, Ada will have no choice but to pursue criminal charges and civil recovery through the courts. That process would likely result in the seizure of your personal assets, including your house, and potential jail time." Marcus picked up the pen Leonard had provided and stared at it like it might bite him. "What happens to Sarah and the kids if I sign this? How do I explain to my wife that I've lost everything we've worked for?" The question revealed so much about how Marcus viewed his situation. Even now, faced with evidence of his own criminal behavior, he was framing the consequences as something that was happening to him, rather than something he had caused. The hardship his family would face wasn't the result of his theft and mismanagement. It was the unfair outcome of my decision to hold him accountable. "Sarah and the children will be fine financially," I assured him. "The trust fund Walter established for Sarah is completely separate from any of this. They'll need to adjust their lifestyle significantly, but they won't be destitute. As for what you tell your wife, I suggest you start with the truth about how you've been funding your family's expenses for the past year." Marcus signed the documents with sharp, angry strokes, each signature looking like it physically pained him to write. When he finished, he shoved the papers back across the table to Leonard and stood abruptly, his chair scraping against the floor. "I hope you're satisfied," he said, looking directly at me with undisguised resentment. "You've destroyed my career and my family's security because your feelings got hurt at a dinner party." I remained seated, meeting his gaze calmly. "Marcus, I gave you 8 years of financial support while you built Richardson Tech. I never asked for credit or recognition, never demanded oversight of your operations, never questioned your business decisions. All I required was basic honesty and respect. You couldn't manage either one." He left without another word, and Leonard and I sat in silence for several minutes after the door closed behind him. Finally, Leonard gathered the signed documents and placed them in a secure folder. "Well, that's done. Richardson Tech belongs to you now, Ada. What are your plans for the company?" I had been thinking about that question for days, weighing options that ranged from immediately shutting down the company to investing additional resources in a complete rebuild. I want to honor the commitments Richardson Tech has made to its current clients and employees. These people shouldn't suffer because of Marcus's misconduct. But I also want to restructure the company entirely, starting with new management that actually understands technology and business ethics. Leonard nodded approvingly. "I've already identified several candidates who might be interested in running the company. There's a woman named Dr. Jennifer Walsh, who recently left a senior position at a larger tech firm specifically because she wanted to work somewhere with more integrity and employee focus. Her background is in the same industry sectors as Richardson Tech, and she has a reputation for turning around struggling companies." We spent the next hour discussing the practical aspects of Richardson Tech's transition. Leonard would handle the legal formalities of transferring ownership while I worked with Dr. Walsh to assess the company's current projects and employee situation. The immediate priority was ensuring that payroll would be met on Friday and that clients would continue receiving the services they'd contracted for. By the time I left Leonard's office, I felt simultaneously exhausted and energized. The confrontation with Marcus had been unpleasant but necessary, and now I could begin the work of building something meaningful from the wreckage of his mismanagement. For the first time in years, I was taking an active role in shaping the outcome of my investments, rather than remaining invisibly supportive. The drive home gave me time to think about the conversation I would need to have with Sarah. She would be devastated by the revelation of Marcus's fraud and the loss of their current lifestyle, but she also deserved to know the truth about how that lifestyle had been funded. I decided to call her that evening and ask her to come for dinner the next day, giving myself time to plan how to explain the situation as gently as possible. Sarah arrived Tuesday evening looking cheerful and relaxed, carrying a bottle of wine and chattering about Emma's upcoming school play and Jake's progress in Little League. She seemed genuinely happy to be spending time with me, and I felt a stab of guilt about the conversation that was about to destroy her peace of mind. We prepared dinner together, falling into the comfortable rhythm we'd developed when she was a teenager, and cooking had been our primary way of connecting. It wasn't until we were sitting at the table with our meals that Sarah noticed something was wrong. "Mom, you seem distracted tonight. Is everything okay? You're not still upset about Christmas, are you?" Because Marcus has been making a real effort to be more inclusive and respectful. I set down my fork and looked at my daughter, trying to find words that would be both truthful and kind. "Sarah, there's something I need to tell you about Marcus and Richardson Tech. It's going to be difficult to hear, but you need to know what's been happening." Sarah's expression shifted from curiosity to concern. "What do you mean?" "Has something happened to the company? Marcus mentioned they were having some cash flow issues, but he said it was normal for tech startups." I told her everything, starting with my 8 years of anonymous investment in Richardson Tech, and ending with yesterday's meeting where Marcus had signed over ownership of the company. I explained the forensic audit findings, the evidence of systematic fraud, the company's impending bankruptcy, and the legal alternatives that had led to yesterday's resolution. Sarah listened without interrupting, her face growing paler with each revelation. When I finished, Sarah sat in stunned silence for several minutes, staring at her untouched dinner. Finally, she looked up at me with tears in her eyes. "Mom, are you telling me that every success Marcus has celebrated, every milestone the company has achieved, has been possible only because of your money?" "Yes, sweetheart. Richardson Tech has been running on my investment since its second year of operation. Without my financial support, the company would have folded years ago." Sarah's voice was barely above a whisper. And he's been stealing from you? Taking your money for personal expenses and investments? The forensic evidence is very clear on that point. Marcus diverted over $800,000 from company accounts for personal use, including funding his cryptocurrency trading and your family vacations. Sarah pushed back from the table and walked to the window, wrapping her arms around herself like she was trying to hold something together. Oh my God, Mom, our whole life has been a lie. The house, the private schools, the vacations, everything we thought Marcus had earned. It's all been your money. I went to stand beside her, placing a gentle hand on her shoulder. The trust fund your father established for you is completely separate from any of this. You and the children will be financially secure regardless of what happens with Richardson Tech or Marcus's legal situation. That's not the point, Sarah said, turning to face me with anguish in her eyes. The point is that I've been married to someone who's been stealing from my mother for years while treating her like she's irrelevant to our success. How could I not have seen this? How could I have been so blind? I wanted to comfort her, to tell her that Marcus's deception wasn't her fault, but I also knew that Sarah needed to confront the reality of her marriage without my protection. What will you do now? I asked gently. Sarah wiped her eyes with the back of her hand and took a shaky breath. I need to talk to Marcus. I need to hear his explanation for all of this, though I can't imagine what he could possibly say that would make it acceptable. We finished dinner in relative silence, Sarah lost in thought about the conversation she would need to have with her husband. Before she left, she hugged me tightly and whispered, I'm so sorry, Mom. I'm sorry for not seeing what was happening, and I'm sorry for not protecting you from his disrespect. You deserved so much better from both of us. I held her close, feeling the weight of years of careful diplomacy finally lifting from my shoulders. Sarah, you don't need to apologize for Marcus's choices. But I'm glad you finally know the truth about what your marriage has been built on. The next morning brought a call from Dr. Jennifer Walsh, who had met with Leonard to discuss taking over Richardson Tech's operations. Her voice was crisp and professional, but I could hear genuine enthusiasm when she talked about the company's potential for ethical transformation. We arranged to meet at Richardson Tech's offices Thursday afternoon, giving me a chance to see the company through the eyes of someone who actually understood technology and sustainable business practices. Dr. Walsh was a woman in her early 50s with graying hair pulled back in a practical ponytail and clothes that suggested competence rather than fashion consciousness. She had spent 23 years in the tech industry, working her way up from junior developer to senior executive at 3 different companies. Most recently, she had left a lucrative position as chief technology officer at a major firm because, as she put it, I got tired of watching good technology be used to extract maximum profit from vulnerable users. We toured Richardson Tech's offices together, and Dr. Walsh asked incisive questions about every aspect of the company's operations. She reviewed client contracts, examined the existing technology infrastructure, and interviewed several employees about their current projects and concerns. Her assessment was thorough and brutally honest. The good news, she told me as we sat in the conference room afterward, is that Richardson Tech has some genuinely talented people and a few client relationships that could be salvaged and expanded. The bad news is that Marcus's management style has created a culture of insecurity and corner-cutting that will take time to repair. Dr. Walsh explained that Marcus had been overpromising to clients while under-delivering on technical specifications, creating a pattern of rushed development and inadequate testing that had damaged the company's reputation in the industry. Several employees had left in recent months because they were uncomfortable with the pressure to ship products before they were properly debugged. The company needs a complete cultural overhaul, Dr. Walsh continued. New quality standards, transparent communication with clients about realistic timelines, and a commitment to treating employees as professionals rather than disposable resources. It will require significant investment, both financial and emotional, but I think it's possible to build something sustainable here. I asked Dr. Walsh about her vision for Richardson Tech's future, and her answer revealed exactly why Leonard had recommended her. She talked about technology as a tool for solving real problems rather than generating maximum revenue, about building client relationships based on trust and competence rather than flashy presentations, about creating a workplace where talented people could do their best work without compromising their integrity. Mrs. Collins, I want to be completely honest with you about what this undertaking would involve. Rebuilding Richardson Tech according to ethical business principles will cost significantly more than maintaining the status quo. We'll need to invest in employee training, improve our development infrastructure, and probably accept lower profit margins in the short term while we rebuild client trust. But the result would be a company that creates real value rather than just extracting it. I hired Dr. Walsh on the spot with a compensation package that reflected the magnitude of the challenge she was accepting. We agreed that she would begin immediately, starting with a comprehensive assessment of all current projects and client relationships. Richardson Tech would cease all fraudulent practices immediately, even if it meant renegotiating contracts or accepting financial losses in the short term. That evening, Sarah called to tell me about her conversation with Marcus. Her voice was hollow, drained of the warmth and energy I was accustomed to hearing from her. "Mom, he tried to deny everything at first. He said you were exaggerating the financial problems and that the forensic audit was biased because you were angry with him. But when I showed him the documents Leonard gave you, he finally admitted that he'd been quote 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 quote." I could hear the quotation marks around borrowing in Sarah's tone, her bitter recognition that Marcus was still trying to minimize his theft, even when confronted with irrefutable evidence. "What did he say about the 8 years of investment?" "He claimed he didn't know the money was coming from you. He said Leonard had told him the funding came from a group of anonymous investors, and he'd never suspected that you were involved." "But Mom, even if that were true, which I doubt, it doesn't excuse the stealing." Sarah paused, and I could hear her taking deep breaths like someone trying to maintain composure. "I've asked him to move out temporarily while I figure out what I want to do about our marriage. The kids are confused and upset, but I couldn't keep pretending everything was normal while processing all of this." I felt a mix of sadness and relief at Sarah's decision. Their marriage had been built on financial deception and mutual delusion, but the dissolution would still be painful for everyone involved, especially Emma and Jake. At the same time, Sarah was finally confronting reality instead of accepting comfortable lies. "How are you managing financially?" I asked, knowing that Marcus's departure would leave Sarah responsible for their household expenses without his income. "The house will have to be sold, obviously. Marcus used it as collateral for some of the business loans, and we can't afford the mortgage payments on my salary alone anyway. But Emma and Jake can finish the school year at their current schools, and I found a nice rental house in a good neighborhood that we can afford long term." Sarah's practical approach to her changed circumstances impressed me. Rather than dwelling on what she was losing, she was already making plans to rebuild her life on a more honest foundation. The trust fund Walter had established would provide security for her and the children, but Sarah seemed determined to live within her own means, rather than relying entirely on inherited wealth. Over the next few weeks, I split my time between Richardson Tech's transformation and my family's upheaval. Dr. Walsh proved to be everything Leonard had promised, bringing both technical expertise and ethical leadership to a company that had been rudderless under Marcus's management. She instituted new quality control procedures, renegotiated several client contracts to reflect realistic timelines and deliverables, and began the process of rebuilding employee morale. The financial investment required to stabilize Richardson Tech was significant, but watching the company transform into something genuinely valuable made every dollar feel worthwhile. For the first time since Walter's death, I was actively engaged in building something rather than simply maintaining what already existed. Sarah and the children moved into their rental house in late April, and I helped them unpack boxes and arrange furniture in rooms that were smaller, but somehow felt more comfortable than the Beacon Hill townhouse. Emma and Jake adjusted to their new circumstances with the resilience of children, though I could see them processing the reality that their father wouldn't be living with them anymore. Marcus had found a job with a small consulting firm, work that paid significantly less than his Richardson Tech salary, but allowed him to avoid criminal prosecution. He picked up the children every other weekend, taking them to modest restaurants and free activities rather than the expensive entertainment that had characterized their previous family time. Sarah told me that Marcus was seeing a therapist and attending financial counseling, supposedly working to understand how his need for external validation had led to such destructive choices. I hoped for the children's sake that his efforts at self-improvement were genuine, but I had no desire to monitor his progress personally. One Saturday in May, Sarah brought Emma and Jake to visit me, and we spent the afternoon planting flowers in the small garden behind my apartment building. The children chatted easily while they worked, telling me about their new schools and friends, and I realized that they seemed more relaxed than I'd seen them in years. The pressure of maintaining appearances and living up to their father's expectations had lifted, leaving space for them to simply be children. "Grandma Ada," Emma said as she carefully placed seeds in the soil. "Mom says you own Dad's old company now. Does that mean you're a businesswoman?" I smiled at her directness, remembering how refreshing it was to talk with someone who asked genuine questions rather than making assumptions. "I suppose it does, sweetheart. I'm learning that business is mostly about treating people fairly and making sure good work gets done properly." Jake looked up from the tomato plants he was positioning. "Will you keep Dad's company running, or are you going to close it down?" "We're going to keep it running, but we're making it better. Dr. Walsh is the new boss, and she's very smart about technology and very kind to the people who work there. I think the company will help more people and cause less stress than it used to." Sarah watched this conversation with a soft smile, and later, as we were cleaning up the gardening tools, she said, "Mom, I think this is the first time I've seen you really excited about something since Dad died. Managing Richardson Tech seems to be good for you." She was right. For 3 years after Walter's death, I had been existing rather than living, maintaining routines and relationships without feeling genuinely engaged with anything. Taking active control of Richardson Tech had awakened a part of me I'd thought was permanently dormant, the part that enjoyed solving problems and building something meaningful. Dr. Walsh and I met weekly to review the company's progress, and these conversations became the highlight of my week. She updated me on client relationships, employee satisfaction surveys, and technical developments. But we also discussed broader questions about responsible business practices and sustainable growth. Dr. Walsh had a gift for explaining complex technology concepts in terms I could understand, and I found myself learning about artificial intelligence, cybersecurity, and data privacy with the enthusiasm of a much younger student. Richardson Tech's financial performance improved steadily under Dr. Walsh's leadership, but more importantly, the company began attracting the kind of clients and employees who valued ethical practices over maximum profit. We lost some business from clients who wanted quick fixes and cutting corners, but we gained relationships with organizations that appreciated thorough work and honest communication. By midsummer, Richardson Tech was profitable for the first time in over a year, generating revenue through legitimate services rather than investor funding. Dr. Walsh had expanded the team to include specialists in emerging technologies while maintaining the company's commitment to quality and integrity. The office space felt different too, more collaborative and less performative, filled with people who seemed genuinely enthusiastic about their work. One July afternoon, as I was leaving the Richardson Tech offices after a particularly productive meeting with Dr. Walsh, I ran into Marcus in the building's lobby. He was carrying a box of personal items and looking somewhat deflated, clearly there to collect belongings he'd left behind during his abrupt departure. "Ada," he said, his voice carefully neutral, "I didn't expect to see you here." "I meet with Dr. Walsh every Tuesday to discuss company operations," I replied, matching his formal tone. "How are you doing, Marcus?" He shifted the box to one arm and ran his free hand through his hair, a gesture I remembered from the day he'd sat in my kitchen, apologizing for Christmas dinner. "I'm okay. Learning to live differently, I suppose. The consulting work is fine, and I'm spending more time with Emma and Jake, which is good." I nodded, unsure how to respond to this subdued version of the man who had once dominated every conversation with his confidence and ambition. "I hope things work out well for you." Marcus looked past me toward the elevator that led to Richardson Tech's offices, and I saw something wistful cross his face. "Is it different now? The company, I mean. Are they doing things differently?" "Dr. Walsh is an excellent leader," I said carefully. "The employees seem happier, and the clients are satisfied with the quality of work they're receiving. It's a more sustainable approach to business." "Good," Marcus said, though his tone suggested the conversation was painful for him. I hope they're successful. I know I wasn't the right person to run Richardson Tech, but I did care about the company, even if I didn't show it properly. I studied his face, trying to determine whether this admission reflected genuine understanding or just another performance designed to elicit sympathy. Marcus, caring about something means making choices that support its long-term success, rather than your short-term convenience. That's a lesson it took me a long time to learn myself. He nodded slowly, and for a moment I thought he might try to continue the conversation or ask more detailed questions about Richardson Tech's current operations. Instead, he adjusted his grip on the box and headed toward the building's exit. Take care, Ada, and thank you for not pursuing criminal charges. I know I didn't deserve that consideration. I watched him leave, feeling neither satisfaction nor sympathy, just a kind of neutral recognition that this chapter of our relationship was finally closed. Marcus would always be Emma and Jake's father, and Sarah would need to navigate co-parenting with him for many years to come, but he would never again be someone whose opinions or approval mattered to my sense of self-worth. That evening, I called Dorothy to update her on Richardson Tech's progress and Marcus's unexpected appearance at the office. My sister listened with the kind of satisfied attention she reserved for stories with satisfying conclusions, particularly when those conclusions involved people getting their comeuppance. So he actually admitted that he wasn't the right person to run the company? Dorothy asked when I finished recounting our brief conversation. He did. Whether he truly understands why that was the case, or whether he's just learned to say things that sound appropriately humble, I'm not sure. But at least he's stopped pretending that his failure was everyone else's fault. Dorothy chuckled. Well, that's something, I suppose. And it sounds like you've turned that company into exactly what you wanted it to be. Walter would be proud of what you've accomplished, Ada. The mention of Walter made me pause and consider how much my life had changed since that December evening, when Marcus had dismissed me as irrelevant. I had gone from being an invisible supporter of other people's dreams to being the active architect of something meaningful and sustainable. More importantly, I had learned that my value didn't depend on other people's recognition or appreciation, but on my own choices about how to use my time and resources. As summer turned to fall, Richardson Tech continued to thrive under Dr. Walsh's leadership, and my role evolved from crisis manager to strategic advisor. I attended monthly board meetings, reviewed quarterly financial reports, and participated in discussions about the company's long-term direction, but the daily operations were entirely in Dr. Walsh's capable hands. Sarah and the children settled into their new routines, and I became more involved in their day-to-day lives than I had been in years. I picked up Emma and Jake from school twice a week, helped with homework, and attended their sports games and school events. The smaller house and simpler lifestyle seemed to suit them all, and Sarah appeared more relaxed and confident than she had during her marriage to Marcus. One October afternoon, as I was reviewing Richardson Tech's latest client satisfaction surveys in my apartment, I received an unexpected phone call from my grandson Jake. He was now 12 years old and had developed the kind of thoughtful seriousness that often emerges in children who have witnessed their parents' marriage dissolve. "Grandma Ada," he said without preamble, "Mom told me that you used to give Dad money for his company, and that's why we could afford our old house and everything. Is that true?" I set down the papers I'd been reading and gave Jake's question the careful consideration it deserved. "Yes, that's true. I invested in your father's company for many years, hoping it would be successful and provide security for your family. But Dad didn't know the money was coming from you? Your father knew that his company was being funded by outside investors, but he didn't know that I was one of those investors. I asked the investment manager to keep my involvement private." Jake was quiet for a moment, processing this information. "Why didn't you want Dad to know you were helping him?" The question went to the heart of choices I had made years earlier, decisions that seemed much more complicated in retrospect than they had at the time. "I thought it would be easier for your father to feel proud of his success if he didn't think it depended on family help. I wanted him to have confidence in his own abilities. But then he was mean to you sometimes because he thought you didn't understand business stuff, when really you were the one making his business possible." Jake's summary of the situation was so accurate and so simply stated that I found myself laughing despite the serious nature of our conversation. "That's exactly right, sweetheart. It turns out that trying to protect someone's feelings by hiding the truth often creates bigger problems than just being honest from the beginning." Are you sad that Dad's company belongs to you now instead of him? I considered the question carefully, thinking about the transformation Richardson Tech had undergone and the satisfaction I felt from being directly involved in its operations. I'm sad that your father made choices that hurt his family and his employees, but I'm glad that the company is now being run by someone who treats people fairly and does good work. Sometimes when something breaks, the best thing you can do is rebuild it properly. Jake seemed satisfied with this explanation, and we talked for a few more minutes about his school projects and weekend plans before ending the call. But his questions stayed with me for the rest of the evening, prompting me to reflect on the lessons I'd learned from the whole Richardson Tech experience. I had spent 8 years trying to support Marcus's success while remaining invisible, believing that this approach would strengthen my relationship with Sarah and create security for my grandchildren. Instead, my invisibility had enabled Marcus's worst impulses, while depriving Sarah of accurate information about her marriage's foundation. The kindness I thought I was showing had actually been a form of dishonesty that hurt everyone involved. Taking control of Richardson Tech and forcing Marcus to confront the consequences of his actions had been difficult and sometimes painful, but it had also been necessary. The company was now thriving under ethical leadership. My relationship with Sarah was more honest and closer than it had been in years, and Emma and Jake were learning important lessons about integrity and accountability. Most importantly, I had rediscovered my own voice and agency after years of defining myself primarily through my relationships with other people. I was no longer just Sarah's mother or Walter's widow or Marcus's invisible benefactor. I was Ada Collins, businesswoman and grandmother and community member, someone whose opinions mattered and whose choices had real impact on the world around me. As autumn deepened and Richardson Tech prepared for its most profitable quarter in the company's history, I found myself looking forward to whatever challenges and opportunities the future might bring. The woman who had once sat silent in Marcus's basement, dismissed as irrelevant to her own family's success, had become someone who built companies and shaped outcomes and refused to accept anything less than the respect she had always deserved. November arrived with an early snowfall that blanketed Cambridge in pristine white, transforming the familiar streets into something magical and new. I watched from my kitchen window as Emma and Jake built a snowman in the small yard behind their rental house, their laughter carrying across the quiet neighborhood. Sarah stood on the back porch with a steaming mug, supervising their architectural efforts, with the relaxed attention of someone who no longer worried about maintaining perfect appearances. The contrast with previous winters was striking. In years past, the first snow would have prompted elaborate plans for professional family photos, against picturesque backdrops, expensive ski trips to Vermont, and carefully curated social media posts celebrating their picture-perfect seasonal activities. Now, Emma and Jake simply played in their backyard with mittens that didn't match and snow boots inherited from older cousins, and they seemed infinitely happier for the simplicity. I had been thinking lately about the nature of contentment, about how easily we confuse material comfort with emotional satisfaction. Marcus had provided his family with every luxury that money could buy, but those luxuries had come at the cost of authenticity and security. Sarah's current life was smaller in scope but larger in substance, built on honest relationships and sustainable choices rather than elaborate performances funded by other people's money. Richardson Tech's success continued to exceed all projections under Dr. Walsh's leadership. The company had secured 3 major contracts in the past month, including a partnership with a nonprofit organization that provided technology services to underserved communities. This project particularly excited me because it represented exactly the kind of work I had hoped to support when I first began investing in technology companies. Meaningful solutions to real problems rather than clever ways to extract profit from consumer data. Dr. Walsh had also implemented an employee profit-sharing program that ensured the company's success translated into tangible benefits for the people whose work made that success possible. The contrast with Marcus's management style was stark, where he had hoarded resources for his own benefit while demanding longer hours and lower wages from his staff. Dr. Walsh distributed the rewards of good performance throughout the organization. During our weekly meeting that Tuesday, Dr. Walsh showed me employee satisfaction surveys that revealed remarkable improvements in workplace morale and retention rates. People were staying later because they enjoyed their projects, not because they feared losing their jobs. They were collaborating more effectively because they trusted their colleagues and leadership. Most tellingly, Several former Richardson Tech employees who had left during Marcus's tenure were now inquiring about returning to the company. The cultural transformation has been even more dramatic than I expected, Dr. Walsh explained as we reviewed the survey results. When people feel respected and valued, they do their best work naturally. Marcus's approach of managing through fear and competition was not only unethical, it was also inefficient. I nodded, remembering Marcus's stories about his management philosophy, how he'd prided himself on creating what he called healthy competition among his employees. In retrospect, I could see that his version of healthy competition had actually been a system designed to keep people insecure and desperate for his approval, preventing them from forming alliances that might challenge his authority. There's something else I wanted to discuss with you, Dr. Walsh continued, pulling out a folder I hadn't seen before. I've been approached by representatives from 3 other technology companies that are interested in our business model. They want to understand how we've achieved such rapid improvement in both profitability and employee satisfaction. The folder contained inquiries from companies ranging from small startups to established firms, all seeking consultation on what they termed ethical transformation strategies. Apparently, Richardson Tech's success had become something of a case study in business circles, demonstrating that companies could thrive financially while treating employees and clients with integrity. What kind of consultation are they requesting? I asked, genuinely curious about how our approach might be applicable to other organizations. Everything from restructuring compensation packages to rebuilding client relationships based on transparency rather than overselling. Several companies have admitted that they're struggling with high turnover rates and declining client satisfaction, and they've identified our model as a potential solution. The irony was profound. Marcus had spent years trying to make Richardson Tech into the kind of company that other businesses would want to emulate. But his version of success had been built on deception and exploitation. Now, under Dr. Walsh's leadership, Richardson Tech was actually becoming the industry leader Marcus had always claimed it was, but for entirely different reasons. I think we should be very selective about any consulting work we take on, I said after reviewing the inquiries. We don't want to compromise our own operations, and we need to make sure that companies are genuinely committed to ethical practices, rather than just looking for ways to improve their public image. Dr. Walsh smiled at my response. That's exactly what I was hoping you'd say. I've learned to be skeptical of companies that want to change their culture quickly and easily. Real transformation requires sustained commitment and sometimes difficult choices about short-term profits. We spent the rest of our meeting developing criteria for evaluating potential consulting clients, focusing on companies that demonstrated genuine commitment to employee welfare and sustainable business practices. By the time I left Richardson Tech's offices that afternoon, I felt energized by the possibility that our success might inspire positive changes in other organizations. That evening, Sarah called to invite me to Thanksgiving dinner at her new house. Her voice carried an excitement I hadn't heard in years, the kind of anticipation that comes from planning something genuine rather than performing something expected. She wanted to cook the entire meal herself, with help from Emma and Jake, instead of hiring caterers or ordering from expensive restaurants. I know it won't be as fancy as the dinners we used to have, Sarah said, but I think it might be more fun. The kids are excited about helping with the cooking, and we're going to invite a few friends from our new neighborhood. Nothing elaborate, just people we actually enjoy spending time with. I accepted the invitation immediately, touched by the warmth in Sarah's voice and the obvious pleasure she took in planning a celebration based on connection rather than impressiveness. The woman who had once stressed for weeks about the proper placement of silverware and the political implications of seating arrangements was now looking forward to a potluck-style dinner where the primary goal was enjoying each other's company. "Can I bring anything special?" I asked, already thinking about dishes that would complement Sarah's menu without overwhelming her kitchen. "Just yourself, Mom. And maybe some of those dinner rolls you used to make when I was growing up. I've been trying to recreate them for the kids, but I can never get the texture quite right." The mention of my dinner rolls brought back memories of Sarah as a teenager, standing beside me in Walter's in my kitchen, learning to knead dough and judge rising times. She had been genuinely interested in cooking then, before her marriage to Marcus had transformed meal preparation into another performance requiring professional assistance and Instagram-worthy presentation. The weeks leading up to Thanksgiving passed quickly, filled with Richardson Tech's continued growth and my deepening involvement in the company's strategic planning. Dr. Walsh had accepted 2 consulting contracts with organizations that met our criteria for genuine commitment to ethical transformation, and these projects were providing additional revenue while allowing us to share our successful practices with other companies. I also found myself spending more time with Emma and Jake, helping with homework and attending their school events. Emma was developing into a thoughtful young artist, filling sketchbooks with detailed drawings of the natural world around her. Jake was discovering a talent for mathematics and science, approaching problems with the kind of systematic thinking that reminded me of Walter's approach to engineering challenges. Both children seemed more confident and self-directed than they had been during their father's residence in the house. Without the constant pressure to maintain appearances and meet external expectations, they were free to explore their own interests and develop their individual personalities. The change was particularly noticeable in Emma, who had always been somewhat anxious and people-pleasing, but was now expressing opinions and preferences with comfortable directness. One afternoon in mid-November, while I was helping Jake with a science project about renewable energy sources, he asked me about my decision to take over Richardson Tech, instead of simply withdrawing my investment and walking away from the situation entirely. Grandma Ada, wouldn't it have been easier to just get your money back and let Dad's company fail? Then you wouldn't have had to deal with all the complicated business stuff. It was a perceptive question from someone who understood that the path I had chosen involved ongoing responsibility and effort rather than simple resolution. You're right that it would have been easier in some ways, I acknowledged, but I kept thinking about all the people who worked at Richardson Tech who hadn't done anything wrong. They deserved to keep their jobs, and the clients deserved to receive the services they had paid for. Jake nodded thoughtfully, then asked, "But wasn't it also because you wanted to prove that you could run a business better than Dad did?" His directness surprised me, but I realized that children often perceive motivations more clearly than adults because they haven't yet learned to disguise honest observations as polite diplomacy. That was part of it, I admitted. I was tired of being treated like I didn't understand business when I had been funding the business all along. I wanted to show that companies could be successful without treating people badly. And you did show that, Jake said with satisfaction. Dr. Walsh says Richardson Tech is doing better now than it ever did when Dad was in charge. The fact that Jake had conversations with Dr. Walsh intrigued me, and I asked him how he had come to know her opinions about the company's performance. He explained that Sarah had brought the children to Richardson Tech's offices during a school holiday, giving them a tour and introducing them to Dr. Walsh and some of the employees. "She's really nice," Jake continued. "She explained some of the computer programs they're working on. And she said that the best technology is designed to help people solve problems instead of creating new problems." That made a lot of sense to me. I was touched by Sarah's decision to include Emma and Jake in my business activities, recognizing that this represented a significant shift in how she thought about family boundaries and appropriate involvement. During her marriage to Marcus, she had carefully separated her children from any discussion of business or financial matters, perhaps believing that such topics were too complex or stressful for young minds. Now she seemed to understand that children could handle age-appropriate information about the adult world, and that including them in meaningful conversations about work and values was actually beneficial to their development. Emma and Jake were learning that business could be conducted ethically, that success didn't require compromising personal integrity, and that their grandmother was someone whose opinions and decisions had real impact on the world around them. Thanksgiving morning dawned clear and cold, with bright sunshine that made the previous week's snow sparkle like scattered diamonds across the landscape. I arrived at Sarah's house carrying a basket of dinner rolls and a bottle of wine, my contribution to what promised to be the most authentic family celebration we had shared in years. The house smelled wonderful, filled with the competing aromas of roasting turkey, baking sweet potatoes, and simmering cranberry sauce. Emma and Jake were in the kitchen, wearing matching aprons, carefully mashing potatoes under Sarah's supervision. The dining room table was set with mismatched dishes and cloth napkins that showed signs of frequent use, a far cry from the coordinated perfection of previous holiday meals. Sarah looked genuinely happy, her face flushed from kitchen heat and her hair pulled back in a practical ponytail. She was wearing an old sweater I remembered from her college years, comfortable clothes that prioritized function over appearance. The transformation from her previous incarnation as Marcus's perfectly styled wife was complete, and the result was someone who seemed more like herself than she had in years. The other guests began arriving around 2 o'clock. Sarah's new next-door neighbors, a young couple with twin toddlers, her colleague from the nonprofit where she had recently started working part-time, and an elderly woman named Mrs. Chen who lived across the street and had become something of a surrogate grandmother to Emma and Jake. The conversation over dinner was relaxed and genuine, focusing on shared interests and current events, rather than business achievements or social positioning. Mrs. Chen told stories about immigrating to America in the 1960s, while Sarah's colleague described her organization's work providing legal services to immigrant families. The young parents shared humorous anecdotes about managing twin toddlers, and Emma and Jake contributed observations about their new schools and extracurricular activities. I found myself thinking about previous Thanksgiving dinners at Marcus's house, where conversations had been carefully managed to showcase his business success and their family's social status. Every topic had been filtered through considerations of how it might reflect on Marcus's reputation or Sarah's social media presence. The result had been polished but artificial, like watching actors perform rather than people connecting. This year's dinner felt entirely different, characterized by the kind of authentic exchange that happens when people are genuinely interested in each other's lives, rather than trying to impress or manipulate. Mrs. Chen asked thoughtful questions about Richardson Tech's transformation, while Sarah's colleague wanted to understand how ethical business practices could be implemented in nonprofit organizations. When someone asked about my background in business, I found myself telling the story of Walter's printing company and our approach to building long-term relationships with clients rather than maximizing short-term profits. I explained how Walter had always insisted on treating employees as partners in the company's success, sharing profits during good years, and maintaining jobs during difficult periods. It sounds like Richardson Tech is following a similar philosophy now, observed Sarah's colleague, creating value for everyone involved rather than extracting value for a few people at the top. That's exactly right, I replied. Dr. Walsh understands that sustainable success requires treating people fairly, whether they're employees, clients, or community members. When everyone benefits from a company's growth, that growth tends to be more stable and meaningful. After dinner, while the adults cleaned up, Emma and Jake organized entertainment for Mrs. Chen's twin granddaughters, who were visiting for the holiday. Watching my grandchildren naturally assume responsibility for including younger children reminded me of Walter's belief that character was revealed through small actions rather than grand gestures. As the evening wound down and guests began to leave, Sarah pulled me aside for a private conversation. We stood in her kitchen, surrounded by the comfortable chaos of a successful family gathering, and I could see that she had something important to say. Mom, I've been thinking a lot lately about the choices I made during my marriage to Marcus, and I owe you an apology that goes beyond what happened at Christmas dinner. Sarah's voice was steady but emotional. I allowed Marcus to dismiss and disrespect you for years, because it was easier than confronting the problems in our relationship. I should have stood up for you, and I should have questioned why he was so threatened by your presence in our lives. I reached for her hand, understanding that this conversation represented a level of honesty that had been missing from our relationship for years. Sarah, you don't need to apologize for choices you made while trying to protect your family. Marriage is complicated, and it's not always clear when compromise becomes complicity. But it wasn't just compromise, Sarah insisted. I could see that Marcus was treating you badly, and I chose to ignore it, because acknowledging it would have forced me to examine other aspects of our relationship that I wasn't ready to face. I enabled his behavior toward you, and I'm ashamed of that. The pain in Sarah's voice was genuine, and I could see that she had been carrying this guilt for months. Sweetheart, recognizing the problem is the first step toward making different choices in the future. You can't change what happened during your marriage, but you can decide how to handle relationships going forward. Sarah nodded, wiping away tears with the back of her hand. I want Emma and Jake to see me standing up for people I love, including myself. I want them to learn that respect isn't something you have to earn through perfect behavior. It's something everyone deserves simply by being human. The conversation reminded me of discussions Walter and I had when Sarah was a teenager, moments when we recognized that our daughter was grappling with fundamental questions about integrity in relationships. Sarah was essentially reparenting herself, learning lessons that her marriage to Marcus had prevented her from absorbing fully. "You're already teaching them those lessons," I assured her. "Look at how they included Mrs. Chen's granddaughters tonight, or how they helped their neighbors with yard work without being asked. Children learn more from observing behavior than from listening to lectures." As I drove home that evening, I reflected on the profound changes that had occurred in our family over the past year. 12 months ago, we had been trapped in a dynamic based on performance and deception, where everyone played assigned roles regardless of how those roles felt or what they cost emotionally. Now we were building relationships based on honesty and mutual respect, where people could express their authentic selves without fear of judgment or abandonment. The transformation hadn't been easy or painless. Sarah's marriage had ended, Marcus had lost his career and social status, and the children had experienced the disruption of divorce and financial uncertainty. But from the wreckage of those losses, something healthier and more sustainable was emerging. A family structure built on truth rather than illusion. December brought Richardson Tech's most successful quarter in the company's history, with profits that exceeded our most optimistic projections. Dr. Walsh had also received inquiries from 2 major technology publications, wanting to feature Richardson Tech as an example of ethical business transformation. The recognition was gratifying, but more importantly, it validated our belief that companies could thrive financially while treating all stakeholders with dignity and respect. The consulting work with other organizations was also yielding interesting results. One small startup had successfully implemented our employee profit-sharing model and was already seeing improvements in productivity and retention. A larger firm had restructured its client relationships based on our transparency principles and had actually increased revenue by building trust rather than overselling services. "We're starting to see a ripple effect," Dr. Walsh explained during our December meeting. "Companies that adopt ethical practices are influencing their competitors and suppliers to examine their own business models. It's slower than legislative change, but potentially more sustainable because it's driven by demonstrated success rather than external pressure." I found this development particularly satisfying because it suggested that the lessons learned from Marcus's failures might prevent other organizations from making similar mistakes. Instead of simply cleaning up one company's problems, we were potentially influencing industry-wide improvements in how technology firms treated employees and clients. The holiday season also brought news that Marcus had been promoted at his consulting firm, suggesting that he was finding some measure of professional redemption in his new career. Sarah reported that he seemed more stable during his visits with Emma and Jake, less prone to the grandiose promises and emotional volatility that had characterized his behavior during the final years of their marriage. "I think losing everything actually helped him in some ways," Sarah observed during one of our weekly phone calls. "He's not trying to maintain an image anymore, so he can focus on doing good work and being a decent father. It's like the pressure of pretending to be successful was preventing him from actually being successful." This insight resonated with my own experience of stepping out from behind the anonymity that had defined my business involvement for so many years. When I stopped trying to protect Marcus's ego by remaining invisible, I had been free to contribute openly and effectively to Richardson Tech's operations. Sometimes, the kindest thing you can do for someone is to stop enabling their delusions and force them to confront reality. Christmas that year was celebrated at my apartment, a small gathering that included Sarah and the children, Mrs. Chen from their neighborhood, and Dr. Walsh, who had become something of a family friend through our business collaboration. The celebration was modest but meaningful, focused on conversation and shared activities, rather than expensive gifts or elaborate presentations. Emma had made handmade presents for everyone, carefully crafted items that demonstrated her growing artistic skills and thoughtful attention to each person's interests. Jake had written personalized poems for each family member, compositions that revealed his developing facility with language and his perceptive observations about human relationships. During the gift exchange, Sarah presented me with a framed photograph from Thanksgiving dinner, capturing a moment when Mrs. Chen was telling a story while everyone else listened with rapt attention. The image perfectly encapsulated the warmth and authenticity that had characterized our new family traditions, and I realized that this was exactly the kind of memory I wanted to preserve. "This represents everything I hope our family becomes," Sarah said as I examined the photograph. "People who genuinely care about each other and show that care through attention and respect rather than performance and obligation." As the evening progressed and our guests prepared to leave, Dr. Walsh pulled me aside to share some news that she had been saving for the right moment. Richardson Tech had been approached by a major foundation that funded technology initiatives in developing countries, and they were interested in partnering with us on a project that would provide internet infrastructure and digital literacy training to rural communities. It would be our biggest project ever, Dr. Walsh explained, and it perfectly aligns with our mission of using technology to solve real problems rather than create profit for its own sake. The foundation was specifically impressed by our ethical business practices and our track record of treating all stakeholders fairly. The opportunity excited me not just because of its potential impact, but because it represented validation of everything we had been working toward. Richardson Tech was being chosen for important work, not because we were the cheapest option or the most aggressive in our sales approach, but because we had demonstrated genuine commitment to ethical practices and meaningful outcomes. As I prepared for bed that Christmas night, I thought about the journey that had brought me to this point. A year ago, I had been someone who defined herself primarily through her relationships with other people, accepting disrespect and invisibility as the price of maintaining family harmony. Now, I was actively building something valuable while refusing to compromise my principles or accept treatment that diminished my worth. The transformation hadn't required dramatic confrontations or public declarations of independence. Instead, it had involved a series of quiet decisions to stop accepting situations that were harmful or dishonest, combined with positive actions to create alternatives that better reflected my values and aspirations. Richardson Tech's success was satisfying, but even more meaningful was the knowledge that I had found ways to contribute to positive change while honoring my authentic self. The woman who had once sat silently in Marcus's basement, dismissed as irrelevant to her own family's success, had become someone who built companies and shaped communities and refused to accept anything less than the respect she had always deserved. The new year would bring new challenges and opportunities, but I faced them with confidence born from having proven to myself that change was possible at any age, and that the most important victories were often the quiet ones that restored dignity and created space for authentic relationships to flourish. January brought an unexpected phone call that would reshape my understanding of how far Richardson Tech's influence had spread beyond our immediate business circle. The caller identified herself as Maria Santos, director of a nonprofit organization that provided technology training to disadvantaged youth in Boston's underserved communities. She had heard about Richardson Tech's ethical business practices through her network of social service providers and wanted to explore a potential collaboration. "Mrs. Collins, I hope you don't mind me calling directly," Maria said, her voice carrying the kind of purposeful energy I recognized in people who had dedicated their lives to meaningful work. Dr. Walsh suggested I speak with you about an idea that might benefit both our organizations and the young people we serve. Maria explained that her organization, TechBridge Boston, had been struggling to find technology companies willing to provide meaningful internship opportunities for their program participants. Most firms offered unpaid positions that amounted to little more than coffee fetching and filing, while others demanded qualifications that were impossible for young people from low-income backgrounds to obtain. "We've been looking for a company that would be willing to create real learning opportunities," Maria continued. "Paid positions where our participants could gain actual technical skills while contributing to meaningful projects." Dr. Walsh mentioned that Richardson Tech has a different approach to employee development and community engagement. The conversation intrigued me because it represented exactly the kind of social impact I had hoped to achieve when I decided to take an active role in business operations. Richardson Tech was profitable and growing, but I wanted our success to contribute to positive change beyond our immediate stakeholders. Providing opportunities for young people who had been excluded from the technology industry seemed like a natural extension of our ethical approach to business. I arranged for Maria to meet with Dr. Walsh and me the following week to discuss the specifics of what such a partnership might involve. In preparation for that meeting, I asked Dr. Walsh to research successful models of corporate nonprofit collaboration, particularly programs that created pathways for underrepresented groups to enter the technology workforce. "There are some excellent examples," Dr. Walsh reported when we met to review her findings. "The most successful programs combine technical training with mentorship and real project experience. The key is creating positions that provide genuine value to both the participants and the company, rather than treating the internships as charity work. Dr. Walsh had identified several technology companies that had successfully integrated social impact initiatives into their business operations without compromising profitability or efficiency. These organizations had discovered that diverse teams actually performed better on complex projects, and that employees who felt connected to meaningful social missions were more engaged and productive. The meeting with Maria Santos exceeded all my expectations. She arrived at Richardson Tech's offices accompanied by 2 young people from her current program, allowing us to hear directly from potential participants about their goals and challenges. Both were impressive individuals who had overcome significant obstacles to pursue technology education, and their insights helped us understand how to structure opportunities that would be genuinely beneficial. The biggest barrier we face, explained one of the young men, is that most companies want experience we haven't had the chance to gain yet. It's like needing a job to get experience, but needing experience to get a job. We're looking for someone willing to invest in our potential, rather than just our current qualifications. The young woman accompanying Maria added, "We also want to work on projects that matter to our communities. A lot of technology companies are developing products that don't address the problems we see in our neighborhoods. We want to use our skills to create solutions that actually help people." These comments resonated deeply with Dr. Walsh's vision for Richardson Tech's future direction. We had been discussing ways to expand beyond traditional client services into projects that address social and environmental challenges, and these young people were articulating exactly the kind of mission-driven approach we wanted to pursue. By the end of the meeting, we had outlined a pilot program that would bring 4 TechBridge participants to Richardson Tech for 6-month paid internships. Rather than traditional make-work assignments, these interns would be integrated into client project teams and given meaningful responsibilities with appropriate supervision and mentorship. This isn't charity, Dr. Walsh emphasized as we finalized the program details. We're investing in talent that will strengthen our organization while providing opportunities for people who deserve them. The participants will earn their positions through demonstrated ability and commitment, and they'll be held to the same standards as any other employee. Maria's enthusiasm for the partnership was infectious, and she immediately began working with us to develop an application process that would identify candidates most likely to benefit from the program. We also established connections with local colleges and technical schools to ensure that successful interns would have pathways to continue their education and career development. The announcement of the TechBridge partnership generated unexpected media attention for Richardson Tech. Several business publications featured articles about our innovative approach to corporate social responsibility, highlighting how we had integrated ethical practices with profitable operations. The coverage brought inquiries from other organizations interested in similar collaborations and from young people seeking opportunities to join our team. More personally meaningful was a letter I received from one of the TechBridge participants who had been selected for our inaugural internship program. She thanked me for creating opportunities that recognized potential rather than requiring perfect credentials, and she expressed excitement about contributing to projects that would benefit her community. "Mrs. Collins," her letter concluded, "my little sister told me she wants to work in technology now because she sees that it's possible for someone like us to succeed in this field. That means everything to me, and I wanted you to know that your company is changing lives in ways you might not even realize." The letter reminded me of conversations I'd had with Emma and Jake about their future aspirations. Both children were developing interests that reflected their exposure to positive examples of adult achievement and contribution. Emma talked about using art to help people communicate across language barriers, while Jake was fascinated by renewable energy technologies that could address climate change. These conversations stood in sharp contrast to the materialistic ambitions that had characterized their goals during Marcus's tenure as the family's primary role model. Instead of wanting expensive cars and impressive titles, Emma and Jake were drawn to work that would allow them to make meaningful contributions to the world around them. The change in their perspective reflected broader shifts in how our family understood success and achievement. Rather than measuring worth through possessions or social status, we had learned to value integrity, creativity, and positive impact on other people's lives. This transformation hadn't happened overnight, but it was becoming increasingly evident in both large decisions and daily interactions. Spring brought Richardson Tech's expansion into new office space, a move necessitated by our growing team and increasing project demands. Dr. Walsh had found a building that perfectly reflected our organizational values. A former textile factory that had been renovated to preserve its industrial character while incorporating modern environmental systems and accessibility features. The new space allowed us to accommodate the TechBridge interns, as well as additional employees we had hired to support our expanding client base. More importantly, it provided room for collaborative work areas and community meeting spaces that could host events for our nonprofit partners and educational programs for local schools. During the planning process for our office renovation, I found myself thinking about the contrast with Marcus's approach to workplace design. His office had been organized primarily to impress visitors and project an image of personal success, with expensive furniture and prominent displays of awards and credentials. The new Richardson Tech space prioritized functionality and collaboration, with shared work areas and transparent communication between different levels of the organization. The physical environment sends a message about organizational values, drive, Walsh observed as we toured the completed renovation. When employees see that we've invested in their comfort and productivity rather than executive perks, they understand that we value their contributions rather than hierarchical positioning. The office warming celebration became an opportunity to showcase Richardson Tech's community connections and collaborative approach to business. We invited clients, nonprofit partners, TechBridge participants, and family members to tour the facility and learn about our current projects. The event felt more like a neighborhood block party than a corporate reception, with genuine conversations replacing the networking performances I remembered from Marcus's business events. Sarah attended with Emma and Jake, who were fascinated by the technology demonstrations and impressed by the diversity of people working on Richardson Tech's various projects. Emma spent a significant portion of the evening talking with one of our graphic designers about the intersection of visual art and user interface design, while Jake peppered our environmental engineer with questions about sustainable technology solutions. "This feels completely different from Dad's old company events," Emma observed as we were walking to the parking area. "Everyone here seems actually excited about their work instead of just trying to impress each other." Jake nodded in agreement. "And they're working on things that might actually help people, instead of just making money. That's way cooler than whatever Dad used to do." Their comments reminded me of how much children absorb from adult environments, even when they seem to be focused on other activities. During Marcus's tenure, Emma and Jake had been exposed to business conversations that emphasized competition, profit maximization, and personal advancement. Now they were seeing examples of collaborative problem-solving, ethical decision-making, and mission-driven work. The influence of these different models was becoming apparent in their school projects and extracurricular choices. Emma had joined her school's environmental club and was working on a campaign to reduce plastic waste in the cafeteria. Jake had volunteered to tutor younger students in mathematics, discovering that he enjoyed helping others understand concepts that came naturally to him. Summer brought the completion of our first major project with the International Development Foundation, a success that exceeded everyone's expectations and established Richardson Tech as a leader in technology solutions for underserved communities. The project had provided internet infrastructure and digital literacy training to 12 rural villages, connecting previously isolated communities to educational and economic opportunities that would transform their long-term prospects. Dr. Walsh and I traveled to one of the project sites to observe the implementation firsthand and gather feedback from community members about the program's impact. The trip was both professionally and personally meaningful, providing tangible evidence that Richardson Tech's work was creating positive change in people's lives rather than simply generating profit for shareholders. In one village, we met a young woman who had used the internet access to enroll in online university courses, becoming the first person in her family to pursue higher education. In another community, local farmers had connected with urban markets through e-commerce platforms, increasing their incomes while reducing food waste and transportation costs. "This is what I always imagined technology could accomplish," Dr. Walsh reflected as we toured a community center where children were learning computer programming alongside traditional academic subjects. "When we focus on solving real problems rather than creating artificial needs, technology becomes a tool for human flourishing rather than extraction. The international project also generated additional opportunities for Richardson Tech to work with development organizations around the world. We received inquiries from foundations, government agencies, and nonprofits seeking partners who could implement technology solutions with cultural sensitivity and ethical integrity. Each new project reinforced my conviction that business success and social impact were not only compatible but mutually reinforcing. Companies that treated employees, clients, and communities with respect tended to attract the most talented people and most meaningful opportunities. Richardson Tech's reputation for ethical practices had become our most valuable competitive advantage. The success also provided financial resources that allowed us to expand our community partnerships and employee benefits significantly. We established a scholarship fund for TechBridge participants pursuing technology education, created an employee sabbatical program for community service projects, and implemented one of the most generous family leave policies in the Boston technology sector. These investments in people and community yielded returns that couldn't be measured in quarterly profit statements, but were evident in employee satisfaction, client loyalty, and the quality of work produced by teams who felt valued and supported. Richardson Tech had become the kind of organization that attracted people who wanted to do meaningful work, rather than simply advance their careers. As autumn arrived, I received an invitation that represented a significant milestone in my journey from invisible investor to recognized business leader. The Boston Business Women's Association had selected me to receive their annual award for entrepreneurial excellence, recognizing Richardson Tech's transformation and my role in demonstrating that ethical practices could drive business success. The award ceremony was scheduled for October, with an expectation that I would deliver a keynote address about women's leadership in technology and business innovation. The invitation both honored and intimidated me, representing the kind of public recognition I had spent decades avoiding while supporting other people's achievements from behind the scenes. Dr. Walsh encouraged me to accept the award and use the platform to advocate for ethical business practices and inclusive workplace policies. You have a unique story about taking control of your own investments and building something meaningful, she pointed out. Other women need to hear that it's never too late to step into leadership roles and demand the respect you deserve. Sarah was equally enthusiastic about the recognition, viewing it as validation not only of my business accomplishments, but of my personal journey toward claiming my own voice and agency. "Mom, this is exactly what I want Emma to see," she said when I shared the news with her. "I want her to understand that women can build companies and change industries and be recognized for their contributions at any stage of life." The prospect of giving a keynote address required me to articulate lessons that I had learned through experience rather than formal study. I spent weeks preparing remarks that would communicate both the practical aspects of ethical business management and the personal growth that had enabled me to take on leadership responsibilities. The speech ultimately focused on three main themes: the importance of aligning business practices with personal values, the power of treating all stakeholders as partners rather than resources to be exploited, and the necessity of courage in challenging systems that prioritize short-term profit over long-term sustainability and human dignity. Too many businesses operate on the assumption that success requires compromising integrity, I told the audience of women entrepreneurs and business leaders. Richardson Tech has proven that the opposite is true. Companies that treat people with respect and focus on solving real problems attract the best talent, most loyal clients, and most meaningful opportunities. The response to my address was overwhelmingly positive, with several attendees approaching me afterward to share their own stories of building ethical businesses and challenging industry practices that they found problematic. Many expressed gratitude for seeing an example of someone who had achieved success while refusing to compromise personal values or community commitments. The recognition also generated speaking invitations from business schools, professional organizations, and conferences focused on sustainable business practices. While I accepted selected opportunities to share Richardson Tech's story, I was careful to balance public commitments with my primary focus on the company's continued growth and community impact. Winter brought news that Marcus had decided to pursue a master's degree in nonprofit management, apparently inspired by conversations with Sarah about her work in social services and her observations about Richardson Tech's community partnerships. According to Sarah, he had come to understand that his previous approach to business had been ultimately unfulfilling, even during periods when it appeared successful. He told me that he spent so many years trying to impress other people that he never figured out what actually mattered to him, Sarah reported during one of our weekly phone calls. I think losing everything forced him to examine his values and priorities in ways he had been avoiding. Marcus's personal transformation remained tentative and would need to be demonstrated through sustained changes in behavior rather than just statements of intention. However, his decision to pursue education in nonprofit management suggested genuine interest in contributing to community welfare rather than simply rebuilding his personal wealth and status. The children's relationship with their father had also evolved in positive directions. Emma and Jake reported that their visits with Marcus now included activities like volunteering at food banks and visiting museums, rather than expensive entertainment designed to compete with their mother's simpler lifestyle. Marcus seemed to be learning how to connect with his children through shared experiences rather than lavish gifts. Dad is more like a real person now, Jake observed with characteristic directness. Before, it felt like he was always trying to sell us something or prove how successful he was. Now we can just hang out and talk about normal stuff. These developments reinforced my belief that holding people accountable for harmful behavior could ultimately benefit everyone involved, including the people being held accountable. By refusing to enable Marcus's financial irresponsibility and ethical misconduct, I had forced him to confront the consequences of his choices and develop more sustainable approaches to work and relationships. The new year brought Richardson Tech's 5th anniversary under my ownership, and Dr. Walsh's leadership, a milestone that prompted reflection on how much the organization had changed since I first discovered Marcus's fraudulent activities. The company now employed 43 people, maintained partnerships with 16 nonprofit organizations, and had completed technology projects in 11 countries. More significantly, Richardson Tech had become a model for other organizations seeking to implement ethical business practices without sacrificing profitability or growth. Our consulting work with other companies had expanded into a formal division, providing additional revenue while spreading our approaches to employee relations, client service, and community engagement. The anniversary celebration was held at a community center in one of the neighborhoods served by our TechBridge partnership, symbolizing our commitment to integration with the communities where we worked rather than isolation in corporate environments. The event brought together current and former employees, client representatives, nonprofit partners, and family members for an evening that felt more like a family reunion than a business gathering. During the celebration, Dr. Walsh announced that Richardson Tech had been selected to lead a major initiative providing technology infrastructure and training to refugee resettlement organizations across New England. The project would combine our technical expertise with our experience in cross-cultural communication and community partnership, representing exactly the kind of meaningful work we had hoped to pursue when we first began transforming the company. This project will allow us to use technology to address one of the most pressing humanitarian challenges of our time, Dr. Walsh explained to the assembled group. We'll be working with people who have survived unimaginable hardships and are rebuilding their lives in new communities. Our role is to provide tools that help them connect with resources, education, and opportunities. The Refugee Resettlement Project would require significant expansion of our team and capabilities, but it also represented validation of Richardson Tech's approach to business as a force for positive social change. We had demonstrated that companies could be profitable while prioritizing human dignity and community welfare, and now we were being entrusted with work that would directly impact some of the world's most vulnerable populations. As the anniversary celebration concluded and guests began to leave, Sarah approached me with Emma and Jake, who had spent the evening learning about Richardson Tech's various projects and talking with employees about their work. Both children seemed energized by their exposure to adults who were passionate about their professional contributions to community welfare. "Mom, I've been thinking about something all evening," Sarah said as we stood together watching the cleanup process, where employees and volunteers were working side by side to restore the community center to its original condition. "I want to tell you how proud I am of what you've built here, not just the business success, but the way you've created something that makes people's lives better." Emma nodded enthusiastically. "Grandma Ada, everyone here seems so happy to work at your company. That's different from what I remember about Dad's old job, where people always seemed stressed and worried about getting fired," Jake added. and they're doing things that actually matter. Like helping refugees and teaching kids about computers and making the internet work in places where it didn't work before. That's way cooler than just making money. Their observations confirmed what I had learned through 5 years of active business leadership. Sustainable success required creating value for everyone involved, rather than extracting value for a privileged few. Richardson Tech thrived because employees, clients, and community partners all benefited from their involvement with the organization. The contrast with Marcus's approach to business was striking and instructive. His version of Richardson Tech had focused on projecting an image of success while cutting corners on the substance that would have made genuine success possible. Our version prioritized authentic achievements and meaningful contributions, trusting that recognition and financial rewards would follow naturally from good work. As we drove home that evening, I reflected on the journey that had brought me from an invisible investor tolerating disrespect to a recognized business leader building something meaningful and sustainable. The transformation hadn't required abandoning my values or adopting aggressive tactics that compromised my integrity. Instead, it had involved claiming my own voice and refusing to accept treatment that diminished my worth or contribution. The woman who had once sat silently in Marcus's basement, dismissed as irrelevant to her own family's success, had become someone who built companies and shaped communities while refusing to compromise the principles that defined her character. Most importantly, I had learned that it was never too late to step into leadership roles and demand the respect I had always deserved. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out.